Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to the Biblical Perspective. For the last Saturday of May 2021, biblical stuff has been happening all over the world this week. And just to get an idea how intense it is, all you had to do was look at the United Nations, remembering the words of the prophet Zechariah, who said that in these last days, Jerusalem would become a cup of trembling for all of the world. Seems like all the world's attention would be focused on Jerusalem. Well, this week, the United Nations Human Rights Council, and that name in itself is an oxymoron, my friends, has called for an investigation of Israel. Now, keep in mind, this worldwide organization to bring the nations of the world together, so to speak, in a peaceful way, supposedly, has been overrun since its inception with all kinds of folks who are literally terrorists who run the thing and often are doing just the opposite of what's necessary for peace. So when you see the United Nations getting involved in something like this, you know there's going to be trouble. In fact, President Trump actually pulled us out of this particular council, the UN Human Rights Council, because it was just nothing but a board of hypocrisy. We'll get to why that's so in just a minute, but they have called for an investigation of Israel as the only country that's being singled out in the recent warfare that took place over there, saying that they may even be guilty of war crimes. For what? For responding to the over 4,000 rockets fired at their country from Gaza. So Israel responds and responds in a way unlike many other nations. They try to limit civilian casualties as much as possible. But then when you have a nation that's committing double acts of terror by not only shooting at you, but doing it from behind residential areas and hiding out in apartment buildings, hiding behind women and children and the elderly, and then daring you to shoot at them, the people that should be condemned and investigated are obviously the terrorists behind Hamas. No mention of them. The UN Human Rights Council instead wants to investigate Israel as the country singled out for the things they have done in this last episode. No mention of Hamas, no mention of Iran's funding of these terrorists, Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. And the nations that are represented on this council that could have said something, some did. The vote was 24-9 with many abstentions. Some Western nations that should have stood up against this ridiculous idea did not vote at all, they abstained. But nine others did stand up and say, this is stupid. Nations like Austria, that's very, very pro West, some of the Western nations you'd expect to stand up for Israel did. The United States, of course, not on this council because of what a charade it is. Do you realize who some of the nations are on the UN Human Rights Council that voted against Israel this week? They're nations like Russia, China. Oh yeah, you're really good on human rights right now. You're throwing people in concentration camps and trying to re-educate them if they don't toe your party line. Oh yeah, China is on that council. Another representative on that council is from Venezuela. Give me a break. Seriously? So, these are some of the folks who are willing to stand up and, of course, vote against Israel. It's just fulfilling everything Zechariah said would happen in the last days as literally the nations of the world begin to stand against the nation of Israel and God's people, and including the greatest abusers of human rights. Did you know Cuba is even on that council? Yes, Cuba has a representative on that council. And this week we had another tragic incident when people trying to escape that communist dictatorship tried to once again get on a boat and try to make it to Florida. Didn't work. Just about 13 miles off the coast of Florida, or actually from Key West, their boat capsized and many of them perished, willing to take the chance of their own lives to try to get out of that oppressive nation. And this is one of the nations on the United Nations Human Rights Council. Yeah, give me a break. But they're all standing against Israel. Why? Why is it that Israel is this target? It's a complete fulfillment of everything that was spoken about in the Old Testament about Israel becoming the focus of all the world's attention here in these last days. Now, the other flip side we had to this is this new rise of anti Semitism, where we have people that are now openly attacking Jews, speaking out against Jews. Uh, Jews have been publicly spit on, and some other things, because there seems to be this hatred directed toward the Jewish people. One rabbi this week wrote an article asking the question, where are my Christian friends, my Christian brothers and sisters who said they would stand with us? And now that we are being attacked over and over again in all around the world, including the United States, it's like the church is silent. Where are the articles in the major Christian publications and others standing up for the Jews and standing against this attack that seems to be racially motivated toward anyone that might be a Jew? Well, the church has been strangely silent. Now, you'll notice I'm not one of those silent folks. I'll stand up and stand for Israel and for their rights to exist as long as they have the opportunity to exist. The only democratic nation in an area in the Middle East surrounded by nations that are overrun with terrorists and, for the most part, have not been able to secure even their own country's people, to even keep them safe, much less the threats they seem to be throwing out at Israel. So, in the midst of all of this, who are these people standing with? It's almost like everybody except Israel. They're standing with all the other nations, condemning those and making claims that are just outright lies about the nation of Israel. This rise of anti Semitism is something that's popping up in America at the same time that some other things are going on here in the United States. Now, I want you to watch this. I'm going to focus on some of the words of Jesus Christ himself from his Olivet Discourse. Right now in the United States, we are fighting the kind of educational system that will just foster more hate between different racial groups. Used to that we were trying to say, we're supposed to see past all of that. We're supposed to bring people together. One race, the human race, right? Now we have folks dividing us and intentionally calling people out and identifying them based on their racial background or things that folks in their race did maybe hundreds of years ago that they have nothing to do with, and using this as almost an attack mode driven by Marxist revolutionaries who are trying to overthrow our nation. And we're buying it lock, stock, and barrel, swallowing it. Uh, and as we do that, we're creating more dissension and more problems in the place that will haunt you for generations in our school systems. So while these particular groups tend to be targeted now in our school systems, you've got to think, well, wow, did the Bible ever talk about this kind of thing? I want you to listen to the words of Jesus as he talked about what it would be like in the last days. He said, then they're going to hand you over to be persecuted and they'll kill you. You'll be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away, betray one another, and hate one another. That's a sad, sad commentary, but it's almost exactly like what's happening all around us today. Why is that happening? It's because this hatred is being fomented left and right. When Jesus said many will fall away, it was the Apostle Paul who reminded us that in the last days there would be a terrible apostasy that would take place. And we're seeing it happen left and right. As people who say, well, I was raised a Christian, I was raised evangelical, is the new dirty word in the media. I was raised evangelical, but that's a terrible thing. And I have now recovered from that as if it was some kind of addiction or a disease. And I have moved away from that. Yes, it's exactly what Jesus said would happen. And now using that as an excuse to foment hatred to other people and other groups. He said, many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And we tend to think false prophets are only in the religious realm. My friends, what is more of a false prophet than someone trying to preach to you and promote a godless atheistic system that divides people, causes them to hate one another, rises up to overthrow nations that have offered freedom and freedom of speech, and tries to set up a brand new way of doing things in a country that resembles what's going on in countries that have been utter failures ever since they tried it, ever since they started the Marxist experiment in some of these other nations. It's been a miserable failure. Millions, literally millions, have died at the hands of these Marxist dictators, yet we're being told it will work here. It'll work here. So what happens? Listen to what Jesus said. Because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold. And that's exactly what we see happening. Now, is this idea of making races hate each other also in the Olivet Discourse? It is, but it's not as easy to find. In the verses just previous to that, when Jesus is speaking about these last days, he said, nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Makes you think those are just countries. But in there is the statement in the Greek that ethnos will rise against ethnos. In other words, one ethnic group will be taught to hate another ethnic group. So whenever you see these folks trying to foment hatred against the Jews, hatred against anybody because of their skin color, their background, where they came from, their nationality, these are signs and signals Jesus said would be taking place in our day before he would come. And what's going on in our country, again, one of the things that has to happen for these end time prophecies to be fulfilled is that America has to grow weaker and weaker. The nation that has been, let's say, just a deterrent to other nations that might want to attack Israel, is becoming a weak, immoralized, sick, ancient empire. What was the empire that stood for freedom? And on this weekend, as we celebrate Memorial Day, many of the folks that gave their lives for this country and the freedom we claim today, this nation is going down faster than we ever imagined it might could happen. Folks at the helm who don't know how to steer the ship in the right direction. And it seems like the world is recognizing this over and over and over. In the meantime, we have our law enforcement professionals. They're supposed to protect us, being defunded, demonized, police departments shrinking as many are retiring or taking early retirement, saying, I can't operate like this. And everywhere this is happening, go follow the stats, dozens of news articles about it. Crime is increasing. We had the one man in Atlanta who is part of the defund the police movement had his own car stolen while he's out trying to speak about something in Atlanta. Come on, folks, right under your own nose, you see what happens when we defund the police and we no longer stand for having a society with law and order. So, what did Jesus say? He said, lawlessness will abound. How does lawlessness abound? Well, when you have people who say that law and order is no longer necessary, then what's going to happen? The criminals will begin to rule your neighborhoods, your cities, and your towns. And lawlessness is multiplied when we do what's happening again in many other places around our country, where felons are being released left and right, the dangerous kind, the kind of folks that over and over again have been arrested for things like armed robbery or threatening people or even for attacking and killing people, and yet they're being put back on our streets. This is what's going to rise this level of lawlessness to the point where people are going to begin to turn bitter. See, when Jesus said the love of many will grow cold, how does that happen? Well, you want to love people, you want to be the bearer of good news and of the gospel, and you want to share that love, and that be the focus of how you live. But what happens when you keep getting slapped, when you keep getting hit by the enemy, and no one seems to stand up for you? Well, it turns many people bitter, not better. It turns them into those who now have said, I've had enough, and now I'm going to fight back. And all of a sudden, now you get all the little different groups, and they start feuding like the Hatfields and McCoys. Friends, our society is crumbling all around us. And don't be surprised. Remember, Jesus said, you'll be hated for all nations because of me, that you're going to be the next one to get in trouble. Just this past week, Loudoun County, Virginia, was a place where one of the teachers there, phys ed teacher named Tanner Cross, stood up and spoke about what's going on in his own school system. And he said, I can't lie to my children. I can't lie to kids and say that, look, if you're born a biological male, you might just be a female and vice versa. And that all this stuff that's happening in our directives being handed down to us to teach this new wokeness, as they call it. I can't do this. I can't lie to these kids. Well, did the school system stand with him? Oh, no. Instead, they put him on leave. They said, you're out of here, my friends. We can't have you talking against the new wave. You can't be speaking against this new world order we're trying to promote. You are in the way. One Oregon teacher on a Zoom meeting call actually challenged those people with Christian values and said, look, you're either going to get on board with our agenda or you're going to get fired. It's as simple as that. So, friends, the days aren't coming, they are here. The days in which the very words of Jesus are being fulfilled all around us, starting at Jerusalem and then around the world. The hope that is ours in Christ Jesus is still here because we look forward to what He is going to bring when He returns to straighten out the mess we've made of His world. That's why His second coming is referred to as the blessed hope. So, friends, you keep hoping, you keep looking up, and we'll keep letting you know what's going on in the world that lines up with what the Bible says about all of this right here on the biblical perspective. Worship somewhere tomorrow with God's people. Grow stronger together in worship because we need each other in these days. God bless you.